Hey everyone, Samantha here. Welcome to another episode of Trans IRL. As you can probably tell, this isn't where we normally tape an episode. I'm actually in the White Tank Mountains out west of Phoenix, Arizona, and there's a reason for that I'll get into in just a minute. As a quick reminder, if you don't already subscribe to our YouTube page, please subscribe to us today and you'll receive notifications whenever we go live, which gives you the opportunity to ask questions of our guests live. In addition, if you don't follow us on Instagram, please head over to our Instagram page at TransIRL and follow us there. And that way you'll have the opportunity to ask questions before we tape an episode. You'll also receive updates on our schedule, and you'll also receive the occasional blooper reel. As always, we have our wonderful Addison in our Trans IRL control room. And she'll be monitoring the YouTube live stream chat today to make sure that any of the questions you may have are sent over to our special guests. So let's talk about our guest tonight. Obviously, I'm not in my regular recording place, and that's because my wife is going to be taking my spot tonight. My wife, Laura, will be joined by two other spouses, Rachel and Jenny, of people who have transitioned. And the point of this show has always been to talk about the entire transgender experience. And the experience is more than just my transition or somebody else's transition. It's also the experiences of the people in our lives. And I don't think there's anyone more affected by transition than the spouse of somebody who transitions during that relationship. So tonight I won't be hosting. Instead, I'll be handing over control of the show to Laura, and she'll be taking it from here. So with that said, Laura, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. Thank you to my beautiful wife for the nice introduction. I'm excited to host this important episode of Trans IRL tonight. When I first found out that Samantha is trans, I was completely overwhelmed. I looked online for resources and success stories, but so much of what I found was bitter and negative. I do remember one Reddit post by a friend of ours with a picture of herself and her wife after she transitioned. And the caption said, "Sometimes everything really does work out." So I held on to that hope. It is my hope that by sharing our stories tonight, we can help another spouse in some way. I'm going to start off the episode by giving a short version of our story from my perspective. I'm sure most of you have heard Samantha's version, so I'll give a little bit of insight into my experience as well. We met in marching band and got married in 2006. And it was kind of a pretty quick relationship, but it was a lot of fun. We like to do adventurous things together and go sightseeing and have day trips. And that picture right there is minutes after she proposed to me. You can see I'm kind of still crying there. So it was a really beautiful day. We started our family in 2010. And we had our fourth son just 2 months before I found out about Samantha. So it was a pretty quick succession of children, 4 kids in 8 years. And I knew that Samantha suffered from depression, but I never knew why. It would come and it would go. Sometimes it would be worse than others. And it got really bad in 2016. I was pushing her to see a therapist, and she kept rejecting every single one I suggested. Finally, I convinced her to give me a list of names since she wasn't happy with any of the ones I was calling for her. And she gave me 3 names. And so I called all 3, got her the appointment. And then I thought, what is so great about these therapists that none of the ones I was calling were good enough? And so I looked them all up, and they all listed LGBT in their specialties. And so I thought, no, that just has to be a coincidence. And it's one of those questions that's kind of terrifying to ask, because what if you're wrong? And so that night I decided I had to ask her because it was just eating away at me. So when I asked her if she might have a gender issue, she responded without making any eye contact and said, maybe. And so that was November of 2016. And my initial reaction was a little bit panicky, but I think on the surface I appeared calm. And it just sent off a whole series of events happening very quickly. So I went into kind of a caretaker and fixer role immediately, calling doctors to help her get on hormones, helping her schedule dates for surgeries, helping her pick out clothing and makeup. But on the flip side of all that go helpfulness was real struggle for me. I was slowly watching the person I married slip away and change into someone that I at times couldn't recognize. And I mean, you can see the contrast right there with the picture Addison put up. And every milestone celebration for her was a loss for me. So it was this real juxtaposition of feelings where I was simultaneously happy for her, but also devastated for myself. And in those early days, I was in a real fog. I wasn't eating well, I wasn't sleeping well. And it was then, and even continues to be sometimes, although less so now, just an emotional roller coaster where for a few days I'd be fine. I feel like I've got this. It's going okay. And then all of a sudden something would just hit me and I'd be in tears again, kind of out of nowhere. I went into autopilot with my kids. I was just kind of checked out with everything and consumed by this. So initially I just thought to myself, okay, so now I'm going to be a single mom, and what's that going to be like? Because that's just what people do, right? Because, I don't know, there's no rule book on this. But I decided that I owed it to myself and the life that we built together to give it a shot. And I told myself I would give it a year and see how it went and see how it felt. And I promised nothing other than the fact that I wanted to try and stay. And I want to say here, and I believe this is very important for all the spouses out there, and even just significant others, doesn't have to be a spouse, but not everyone can stay in this scenario, and not everyone should, and that's okay. I'm not here to say every spouse needs to stay no matter what, because I don't think that that's true. And I think that sometimes relationships end for reasons other than transition, but the end is brought about by a transition. It's more marriage related than transition related, if that makes sense. So I just don't want to come across as trying to tell people they have to stay. I really also want to say that she did not convince me to stay. She's had people message her before, oh, how did you get your wife to stay with you? It's like, well, she didn't get me to do anything. I chose to do this. And I'm where I want to be. And it's been a long, hard process, and it still is hard work, but it's where I want to be. And we didn't know how things were going to go. We didn't know how our family was going to take it, how the kids would take it. What about her job? Would we lose friends or family? It was very overwhelming in the beginning. And honestly, her transition has gone very smoothly by most standards, and we're really grateful for that. But it still has been and continues to be a very difficult process. Being a caretaker after any surgery is challenging, and she went through 5 surgeries in less than 2 years, which required weeks and weeks of caring for her and the kids, mostly on my own. Her gender confirmation surgery was by far the toughest. We flew out family and recruited friends to help care for our children so that I could go with her. I created a multiple-page Word document detailing our kids' many, many hours of autism therapies and schedules. The surgery itself was filled with uncertainty, and the recovery was very difficult. So that one definitely took a toll. In the last 2 years, she's started hormones, gone full-time publicly and at work, changed her name and gender marker, bought more clothes and makeup than I have in my entire life, and gone through 5 surgeries. So for me, this process has been simultaneously happy, devastating, hopeful, terrifying, exciting, and also completely overwhelming. So that's a little bit of our background from my perspective. And I want to bring on my friend Jenny next, who we met through the local LGBT community here in the Phoenix area. So Jenny, I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. My story is fairly similar. My wife's name is Sarah. We have 2 boys as well. They're 11 and 9. For us, we met in 2004 in college, and we went from dating to engaged in a matter of 2 months. And it was one of those situations where when you know, you know. And Sarah and we just had this instant connection when we met. And it was one of those situations where it just felt right. And her transition was definitely more gradual. We got married in 2005 in December, so the end of the year. And we had our oldest son in 2007, and then our youngest in 2009. And somewhere in between there, she started slowly collecting some more feminine articles of clothing, and dresser stuff started changing a little bit. And I was just like, no, okay, whatever. This is interesting, but here I am, and I'm in love with the person, so let's see where this leads us. And things were pretty inconspicuous for a while, like some feminine pajama pants when people would come over, things that weren't super noticeable, I'd say, to the naked eye. In 2011, I started playing with the idea in my head long before Sarah ever said anything, and I was kind of like, I wonder if this is where this is headed. Are we looking at a transgender situation? We weren't sure, and I wasn't about to bring it up, but I'd say about then is when I really had that internal thought process go through of, if this becomes a thing, what is my stance? What am I going to do? And I was like, I'm in love with the person. I'm not in love with a body or a part. This is the person I married. This is the person I fell in love with. Nothing has changed about that. So I decided right then and there we were going to make this work no matter what direction we ended up taking it. So I'd say 2013 is about the time, we're both teachers, public school teachers, and that's about the time that she went and took a little career path change and started working from home for a while. And it was kind of an effort to, she was just needing to kind of test out the waters in the possible transgender area. She was still thinking about things at the time. And in 2016 was the first time the word transgender really got used, I'd say. And she was like, maybe, I'm not sure. We talked it through. That was around the same time that I was really thinking about myself too, and where do I stand in my whole identity, because I've been really thinking about that as well a lot. And in 2017, things kind of were like, all right, let's do this. Let's make this work. In February, we decided to tell our kids that she had decided to make a transition. And that went pretty well, and we'll get more into the kid thing a little bit later. At this point, I'd say for me, because we're public school teachers, she came out publicly in 2017 and has been her genuine self ever since. We work and live in the same area, and so we thought it was just really important to be visible, and we didn't want, and she didn't want to have to be someone inside school that was different from outside school. So that was a decision we made. Raising our kids also, we thought at a really early age that our older son, was going to identify as part of the LGBT community himself. And we realized also through discussion with each other that if we wanted him to be his true self, we had to do the same thing. So that was something that drove both of us to make this work, and we are just true soulmates. And it's weird because it's one of those things that I don't think I ever believed in before, just having that one person you're meant to be with. But as we've gone through this transition together, and as we've grown as a couple, that's really changed. And we both are like, wow, some divine intervention happened that put us together, because we are just meant to be together. We're best friends, and we're a team, and we're both living as our genuine selves, I think, for the very first time. And it's just been great to watch her grow. I too, at the very beginning, went online and I was like, all right, so what do I do? Who else has experienced this? And it was really hard, like Laura said, to find some positives out there and people who stayed. And I really wanted to make it work. I was in love with her, and in any form. And I was like, all right, let's do this, I guess. And here we are. And I think our relationship is definitely stronger than ever. I went through I say the term mourning process loosely, I guess, but just really realizing that the person I married was still there, but in a different way. And could I be strong enough to make all those changes that needed to go with it? I'm a very anxious person in general, and I found that at the beginning of transition, I became very protective. And we would go out in public, and people would look, and I had to make sure that I was being strong as well. And I found my anxiety level was so much higher than it had ever been before. But as the transition's gone on and it's just become our life and we're just so visible in the community, that anxiety level has just dropped so much. And similar to Laura, I would say too, we've had a very positive experience so far, thankfully. We live in a pretty liberal little pocket here in Arizona, which is nice, and people recognize us when we go out and they say hi, and we're just really lucky to have our community behind us and the people that we have become friends with. Thankfully, all of our families are on board, which is excellent too. And that's been really important and a real big help in being able to make this transition possible. So that's pretty much our story, and I look forward to answering your questions later.
All right. Well, thank you, Jenny, for that quick synopsis. And now we're going to be meeting Rachel. And Rachel's a friend of mine I met through an online support group. And although we've sadly never met, I still feel like I know her very well because I lean on her frequently for support throughout this process. So, Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. So my wife's name is Joanna. We met in high school. We dated on and off, and we were just destined to be together, and eventually got married in 2006. And we look like such babies there. So we had kids. Eventually we have 2 little girls, and she came out to me about 3 years ago, in 2016. It was January 2nd. And I remember that day very vividly. I was completely shocked. I had no real hints coming my way or anything. We had plans, and I went and checked on her, just asking how she was doing. And she seemed like she needed some space. So I gave her some space and went and hopped in the shower. And the next thing I know, she walks in. She says, "Hey, Rach, we need to talk." And there was something about the tone in her voice that just made my heart sink. I'm sitting there going, "Oh shit, what did I do?" Then she said, "I'm thinking about going to see a gender therapist." And I honestly to God just sat there. I was like, okay, I'm not sure what this means. Please keep talking. And she did. She talked and explained about her gender dysphoria, explained some of her depression and the way she's been feeling and how long she's been feeling that way. And it was a very short conversation. I just kind of listened. I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know how to ask questions. I just was extremely blindsided. I was confused. And then the rest of the day happened. And I remember crying myself to sleep that night. And then I remember waking up early the next morning and Googling everything that I could. I wanted to know what this really meant for her. And I wanted to know what this meant for me as a spouse, and if it was possible that we can stay together, because I'd never heard of this happening, right? And I was pretty sure in those early days that I was the only one on the face of the planet that had ever experienced this. And so as I was searching and Googling, I found the story of Laura Jane Grace. She's a musician that was married when she came out to her spouse, and they ended up getting a divorce, probably for different reasons, but it didn't matter to me because there was all of a sudden somebody else who had experienced a little bit of what I was going through, and I felt less lonely. So it was really helpful. And then from there, I just kept watching YouTube videos of trans women transitioning, just watching these 2 to 5 minute clips of their transition and seeing the differences on their faces meant the world to me. It allowed me to really see what was happening, and the smiles that just showed up on these videos. Anyway, so that was extremely helpful for me. We spent the next few weeks just kind of in fear. I wasn't really sure what was going to happen, but eventually something clicked, and I just realized it really didn't matter for me and for our relationship. It didn't change anything. So like Joanna had asked, she asked if she could go see a gender therapist, and I asked if I could go with her. And it wasn't to have couples therapy. It was so that we could be in this process together. It was almost like a group therapy for the two of us. And looking back, it was one of the best things that we did for each other and for this whole transitional process, because it allowed her to see what I was going through, and it also allowed me to see what she was going through. And it really unified us on this front, that this was our fight and we were going to figure this out together. So she started estrogen pretty fast. It was St. Patrick's Day of 2016, and then started doing hair removal stuff. And eventually it became evident that she needed gender confirmation surgery, and she had that done last year. And then we were lucky enough to renew our vows last year as well, which was an amazing day for us. But this transition has been a mix of good and bad with our community. We've experienced some extremely loving people and a little bit of the bad as well, but it's allowed us to grow, kind of made us stronger as a couple. But like Laura said, I just want to second that this is my decision to stay. This isn't me saying that this is what other people should do. But I do think it is important for people in these situations to know that there are options and that it can work. And so, yeah, that's my story.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. So I think we're going to jump right into questions, because according to Samantha, there were more than twice the number of normal questions submitted for this episode. So I apologize in advance to anyone who submitted one. We're probably not going to get to all of them, but we're going to try to hit the highlights and then take some questions from the live chat as well. So the first question is, how did you take the first talk about your spouse's feelings about transition? So I guess I'll answer first and then I'll hand it over to you guys. So for me, like I said in my intro, it was kind of shock. I kept a cool, calm exterior. My first thought was, don't freak out, have a good reaction, because I knew that she was really bearing her soul to me, and I knew that was important in that moment. But internally, my head was just spinning because I was completely blindsided. There were no hints. There were no clues. I had no idea this was coming. And all of the hundreds, if not thousands of people that knew her pre-transition that we've told, not a single one said, yeah, I kind of always thought she was trans. It was not on anyone's radar. So I was just completely blown away and shocked. And so we just started talking and talking and talking. And although I was panicking on the inside, like I said, I kind of tried to stay calm on the outside and just really try to understand what she was telling me and what was happening. And we talked a whole bunch. And then we had a dinner party with some college friends we hadn't seen in years. And then we didn't talk about it anymore that night and just kind of pretended like the whole thing hadn't happened. But then the next day, all day, every day for weeks, it was just consumed with it, thinking about it, talking about it. So I guess that would be my answer. So Jenny, do you want to jump in with your experience?
Yeah. We kind of had a different one. It was such a gradual experience for us that it was just so slow, and it was just creeping into our life that I guess when she finally said the word transgender, honestly, I wasn't super surprised because I'd already been connecting dots that may be a possibility. So I played out different scenarios in my head a little bit, and I was like, all right, so if she ever tells me, what's my reaction? So I kind of had an idea in my head as to how I was gonna react to it. I wasn't super surprised, and a lot of people weren't either. Sarah's always had a little feminine air about her, and so it wasn't a huge surprise to most people. It was a little like, oh, okay. But then when they connected the dots too, it wasn't super surprising. But I guess I was kind of expecting it a little bit. She was really nervous to tell me, and I was just like, it's okay. You know, I kind of saw this coming.
All right. So Rachel, how about you? How did that first conversation go? I know you said it was a pretty quick one.
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit, but it wasn't really one conversation. That was the first day, and we talked very briefly. It was more like a very gradual conversation over the next couple weeks. And I remember struggling to get through the end of the day to get home to be with her because I just needed to be with her and we needed to talk about this and we needed to figure it out. Um, but it was just very shocking. I think one of the kindest things that she said, but it also helped me really put things in perspective, is she saw how much my heart was breaking and she was willing to put everything back. She said, if this is too much, let's just put it away. Let's just pretend like this didn't happen and we'll just move on. It's fine. And I just sat there for a minute. I said, no, we can't pretend like this isn't real. You can't deny who you are. And if you do, then that's just going to cause, things to boil underneath. And eventually, you could have resentment for me or a handful of other things happen. And so I think that was probably a good conversation because it was a very loving, honest conversation on both of our parts to recognize the pain that we were both in, but recognizing the truth of what had to happen. And so then from there, it was just, all right, let's move forward. Let's figure this out.
And I think to piggyback on that too, I would say in the beginning, I remember Samantha telling me, if you need to leave, I won't blame you. No one would blame you. And kind of like what you were just describing, that kind of gave me almost, I don't know if it's comfort but it just showed me that despite all of the many years of suffering and struggling she'd had, that she really valued my feelings in the process. So thank you for your insight on that, Rachel. And we're going to jump over to question 2 now. So it says, how do you feel people perceive you when they find out that your partner is trans? So this is, of course, hard to answer for me just because we're not supposed to care what other people think, right? Sticks and stones can break our bones and all that good stuff. But I think for me, probably the things I worry about people perceiving about me are that I'm a pushover or a doormat, that I'm being forced to stay, that I'm only staying because of the kids. So those are things that I worry about. Now, whether people really think them or not, I mean, who knows? But it definitely can feel that way. And that's not a great feeling to have. Over time, I have grown to care less. But that definitely was a concern in the beginning. And then another thing too, whenever people see us together that don't know us from before, they assume that we're lesbians. And I even had a doctor recently ask me, how old were you when you figured out that you were gay? And it's like, never. So sometimes I forget that when people are on the outside looking in, they see something different. I see all the history and I see everything behind it. And so sometimes it's hard to picture kind of what people perceive. But I think for me, it's just important for people to know that this is my choice to be here. So Rachel, what are your thoughts on this one?
So this is an interesting one because for a minute I was like, no, I don't think I care. It's fine. But no, there is some truth to a lot of what you said. And the days that we're with people that don't know anything from before and we can pass just as this lesbian couple are sometimes easier and nicer because I worry that people look at me with this pity, surprise, like I'm stuck, when they don't realize how much of this was actively my choice. But then I get those microaggressive comments and they'll say things like, oh, Joanna's so lucky to have you, or I couldn't stay. I couldn't do what you've done. And while they sound nice, they come across in it just digs at me in this weird way. And a lot of it has to do with the relationship with the person and their tone. But those kind of comments have probably pissed me off more than any other comment because I don't know. I don't know. It's really hard to explain, but that's probably the part of it that bugs me the most.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that too. I know exactly what you're describing, and I agree that it is very frustrating. Jenny, do you have anything to add?
I just find myself going a lot more mama bear, and so I'm just always watching, and we haven't had too many people say anything to us. We get a lot more of the looks, and so we're at the point now where we can kind of just laugh them off and talk about it later and just keep going. But pretty much a lot of what you said about some of the comments about I couldn't stay, I don't think I could stay. We've gotten that a couple times, and I'm just like, well, this is my story, so you'd have to do what you would need to do. But pretty similar to what you guys were saying, only I think it's more nonverbal with us, and we just keep moving.
Great. Okay, well, we're going to move to the next question now. So this one is, how do you feel your spouse has changed mentally and emotionally through transition? So for my Samantha, she has changed in pretty much every possible way, mentally and emotionally through transition. Before transition, she was kind of a hermit. She would maybe hang out with friends a couple times a year. She was never calling people, texting people, doing anything social. I was basically her only friend. And it was interesting. Recently, I had dinner with a mutual friend that we met post-transition. And she was saying, you just seem like the introverted one and Samantha's the outgoing one. And it just kind of knocked me over because I thought, I don't think that's true. But I mean, it kind of is true now. And it wasn't before. And so again, for me, I see all of the history and everything leading up to this. But other people don't see it. And so she is a social butterfly and Miss Instagram Queen. And she's doing this YouTube channel, which I think is really great and really important. And I hope can be a positive resource for a lot of people because, like we said previously, there's not a ton of resources out there for the trans community. And so I think that all the things that she's doing are great. But if someone had told me 3 years ago that this is where we would be right now, I would not have believed it whatsoever because she has changed so much. So Jenny, do you feel like you've seen some changes in Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah's a totally different person than she was. She's so much happier and calmer. And I recognized that she was getting depressed long before she did. And she was like, oh, wow, yeah, I totally am. And she's become a lot more social, like you were saying about Samantha, Laura, because she also would shy away from any kind of social media, never liked having her picture taken. And she used to get really jealous when I would go out with some girlfriends. And now she's the one going out with all her girlfriends. And she's taking selfies all the time. I'm always giving her a hard time for all of her picture taking that she's doing as well. And she's just so much more confident and comfortable, and you can just see it shine through inside and out. So it's been really, really awesome to see that change in her.
That does sound nice. And I would agree. Samantha is also a selfie queen. I give her a hard time a lot. I'm sure that you guys have seen my photo bombs on Instagram.
Oh, yes. Quite a few.
All right. So Rachel, what are your thoughts on this one?
So mentally and emotionally, I would say she's a stronger person. She's a happier person. She's a more even keel person. But beyond that, like a lot of her interests are the same. We still relate to each other in the same way. So I don't have as much of a drastic change to get used to in that way. I mean, she is able to be more feminine, obviously, and express her interests in things that are more feminine, like more socially acceptable to the feminine world. And so in those ways, she's more comfortable. But beyond that, I don't feel like there's been a ton of change in her person and her personality, which I know is not always the case with a lot of trans people. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So our next question is, how hard was early transition on you, especially socially? So for me, early transition, I kind of went into mama bear mode, like what Jenny was describing a little bit, and sort of became her protector. And in doing so, at times would forget to protect myself and my own heart and the journey that I was on. And so that made it hard for me in the beginning. Also, it was difficult socially trying to navigate relationships with family and also with friends that we knew pre-transition, because I had plenty of opportunity and time to get used to it with spending all day, every day together with her. And then other people might only see her once in a blue moon, or might even live across town, out of state. And so that made it a little bit harder for people to adjust to the idea. And so trying to kind of live this in between where people around me were still getting used to it, even though I was comfortable with it, that social aspect of it was definitely a challenge for me. So Jenny, what do you think?
So the year Sarah came out publicly in 2017 was a really tough year in general. I lost my grandma in March, I lost my mom in June, and we were also navigating her transition through all that as well. So it was a really tough year in general. The first discussion you have with people is always so nerve-wracking, because you're like, how are they going to react to what I'm about to tell them? And you think you know people and you think you can gauge their reaction. And thankfully, most of the time I was pretty spot on with how they were going to react. But there was a lot of anxiety in there for me, I think for both of us, because we did have to tell our families. And Sarah had also converted to Judaism when our youngest was 6 months old. So she had that difficult discussion with her mom then, and now had to have this difficult discussion again with her mom. So I made sure to be with her for that. And that mama bear thing, it just keeps coming back, because that whole time I was so on edge and just watching everything that was going on the whole time. We also had a really big trip to Hawaii planned. So it was somewhere out of our comfort zone, somewhere out of people and places that we were comfortable with. We were going to a whole new place and having to basically do early transition out there on our big family vacation, which just really amped up that mama bear mode. Because our kids were in 2nd and 4th grade at the time, we also not only had to talk to our friends and our coworkers and all those people, but also talk to our kids' friends too. I went to the boys' school, which feeds into my school, and I was like, hey, this is what my family's going through right now. You know, any way you can be supportive, just kind of keep an eye and ear out on our kids. It would be really appreciated. And our older sons had the same group of friends since kindergarten, and they've known us since kindergarten. And so they have just known Sarah this whole time and kind of saw the change in her. So again, not super surprising, but our younger son has always kind of flitted and fluttered between friend groups. So he hasn't had just one solid friend group to be able to tell. So just always having to have that discussion was tough. And then also having to explain to the kids, you know, this is how you handle some of these situations, because they were going through a huge transition as well with this. But socially, no one was really surprised, I guess, when Sarah came out to them or I told them about her. Everyone was like, oh, that's cool. When are we going to go out to dinner together? You know, things like that. So we got pretty lucky, but it was just that mama bear mode all the time, and that nervousness of how are people going to react.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Rachel, what about you?
I totally get the mama bear mode. Totally understand that. Early transition was really interesting because I've lived my life very much as an open book, and all of a sudden I was thrown into this closet, and I didn't feel like I could say anything, and I didn't want to say anything. So those first couple months were really difficult, where we only had each other to lean on and to figure this out. Luckily for us, a lot of our world is separated. Our kids go to a school that's outside of our neighborhood. We both work in places that are separated from our friends. And so we were able to kind of test the waters with a couple people and not have it affect, you know, the rest of our world. And that worked really well for us. It was funny that when we first told our daughter, I guess we'll get into kids a little bit more, but she wanted to tell her teachers. And since she wanted to tell her teachers and our world was separated, it was really easy for us. Like, okay, let's go tell your teachers. That's totally fine. But 2016 was our year and it was difficult. We had a family reunion and coming up, and Joanna was going as Joanna for multiple reasons. And so we had to tell my big family, and I called every single one of them and had a personal conversation with all of them. And it was extremely difficult, extremely exhausting, and some of them were great conversations. Some of them weren't so great. Some of them were super repetitive. And then we moved on to Joanna's family, and then we moved on to work, and then we moved on to school. And it was just one thing after another through the whole year. And it was exhausting. I remember almost breaking down in my therapist's office because of that mama bear mode that I was in. And because I could finally breathe, I could finally say, okay, everybody knows I can breathe a little bit. And it was a huge relief. I didn't realize how much I had been carrying until after all of it was over. And I was very grateful for that, for sure.
I can definitely relate to that feeling too. All right, so our next question is, how does your spouse's dysphoria affect you? So for me, it's been kind of a mix. Initially, I was super sympathetic and tried to be as supportive as I could, as helpful as I could. I would shower her with compliments and just try to help her see what everyone else sees. Over time, as the transition has progressed, and I think that all the viewing audience would agree that she is very beautiful, it's become honestly a little bit harder for me to go into that same mode. And I think it's just because I don't experience dysphoria, I can't know what it feels like. And so whenever she comes to me and thinks, oh, I look this way, or this particular feature is bothering me, or whatever it is, I'm just like, no, you're gorgeous. I don't know what you're talking about. I literally don't see what you're talking about. You look amazing. And so she's actually told me fairly recently that it's more helpful for her when she gets dysphoric at this point to lean on people who have also gone through it, versus me, because it's not something that I can fix for her. I just can't. Unfortunately, I wish I could. I wish I could somehow make it better, but I unfortunately can't. So I try to support her as much as I can with it. I'm not saying that I don't, but I think that for her, it's kind of changed from me building her up to where she handles it better when being supported by friends who've gone through it. So Rachel, how about you and Joanna?
Oh, so this was an interesting question also. At the beginning, it was frustrating because I didn't understand it and I wanted to fix it. I am the fixer. I want to make everything right and everything perfect. And you can't. I can't. So that was difficult. It was also difficult to see how the dysphoria really affected her, and caused depression or outbursts or anger, silence. um, but I kind of, with myself and working with the therapist and some really internal digging, um, she didn't want to keep burdening me with the same thing over and over and over again, which I appreciated, but I also needed to know what was going on in her head. So over time, we've been able to kind of find this balance where she just says, I'm feeling dysphoric, or I'm just not feeling it today. And I have just recognized that I can't fix it. It's not about me. And so it doesn't affect me mentally anymore the same way that it used to. I think my response is usually, I'm sorry, that sucks. I love you. I'm here for you. And I feel like my job when she is feeling that way is to just support her and love her through that process and let her know that it doesn't matter to me, and allow her to just kind of work through that. Because as far and after having gender confirmation surgery, a lot of her dysphoria did go it did go away, which has been great. But that doesn't mean it doesn't come every once in a while. And as far as I understand it, I can be corrected, but it almost doesn't matter how many surgeries you have, you know, the dysphoria is still going to come in one way or another. And so it's learning how to manage that as a person, as a trans person, and then as a spouse, learning not to take it personal, right? If they need a moment for themselves or they need to figure it out. And so I feel like it was difficult at first, but I've been able to manage how to help her since then, for sure.
All right, great. Jenny, what are your thoughts on this one?
This has probably been the hardest thing for me to deal with because I'm not quite sure how to deal with it. Sarah's still pre-confirming surgery, and her dysphoria is strong. It definitely ebbs and flows. And other than complimenting her on the way she looks and then just being that shoulder for her to cry on and being someone she can talk to, honestly, I'm not quite sure how to help because I can't. Some days it takes forever for her to get dressed and she looks great and everything she tries on, but she's just having one of those moments where she just needs to find the right outfit. And I try really hard not to get super frustrated with her, and I know that I do, and I know it drives her crazy. But it's one of those things I can't help, and I just wish I could, because if I could take that away from her, I wouldn't heartbeat. Just the other day, actually, she was having one of her dysphoric days, and we'd finally gotten her dressed and out of the house, and I was like, "Hun, your cheekbones, like, you've really got cheekbones right now." And she's like, "No, I don't." And she gets her phone out and she's trying to look, and then I took a picture and she was like, "Oh my gosh, they're there," and she was so excited. So just finding those moments and seeing her so happy really made my day in that moment when I was able to do that. But it's hard because, you know, Laura, like you were saying, and Rachel, you too, like, we can't relate to that. So just trying to find ways to help the best we can is just being there, I guess, is my number one.
I think that makes a lot of sense too. So our next question is, how involved were you in decisions on the transition, and were there any compromises? So for us, I was extremely involved in all of the decisions on the transition throughout the whole process. If anything, especially in the early days, I was kind of the driving force, because for me, in some ways, not all, but in some ways, it was kind of a relief to find out this is the thing. This is the thing that's been bothering her all these years. So how do we fix it? And transition was the best way to fix it or treat it. And so I pushed for her to start hormones as soon as possible. And I was making phone calls for surgeons and getting consults and information. And then I pushed for us to sit down and come up with a calendar where we listed out, what order are you going to do things in? When do you want things to happen? And so initially I feel like kind of a driving force in it, because I wanted her to know I was on board and I wanted to help her feel better as quickly as I could. As far as compromises, I would say probably for us, the most difficult surgery that we navigated was the breast augmentation. And it was really a timing issue. I was hoping to wait until we could get some insurance coverage. Unfortunately, her dysphoria was so strong that she didn't feel that she could wait. And so there was definitely some fighting going on there. I'll keep it real. There was fighting going on leading up to that surgery. But she has since had the surgery. It was a successful procedure, and she's recovered nicely from it. And we'll figure out the finances just like we always do. But that's probably the closest thing I would say to a compromise or a fight through the process. Everything else, we've really been pretty much on the same page for all of it. So Jenny, how about you?
I'd say in our case, I've pretty much left it up to Sarah, and she hasn't done too much at this point. So I've let her kind of take the wheel on that, and we just have open dialogues about everything that she wants to do, and just make sure that we both know what she's interested in doing. But it's just been a 50-50 discussion. I mean, this is kind of her game. I'm here to support her. So I'm just here for her when she needs me and has questions or concerns, and we talk them through, and She makes those decisions, and like you were saying, Laura, we figure out the finances.
Yes, transition is not cheap, and that
Lots
can
of
definitely be a big
yeah.
stressful factor for Rachel. What about you? How involved were you in all the decisions?
I feel like I was extremely involved, kind of because of the way that we did therapy together. Everything we did was kind of us against the world. We're going to figure this out. It was a really driving force to help us find what our new normal was, because all of a sudden everything was, up in the air, what things look like, what did things mean, and neither of us like that. We kind of like things to be grounded and consistent. And so we really wanted to find out what that new normal looked like for us. And so Joanna made the decisions. I tried my best to let her make the calls, but I feel like everything was an actual conversation, and we worked it out. We worked through it together, and I don't know, we've benefited from it as well as a couple, though.
That sounds great. And I want to say too, I haven't actually mentioned this yet, but shortly after I found out about Samantha, I also got my own personal therapist. I still see her or talk to her once a week to this day. And we have done some couples therapy over the couple years, and Samantha has worked with a therapist as well. So we've definitely had that support also. And I think that's a great resource for spouses to try to find someone that you connect with and that can really understand your side of things. Okay, so our next question is, how much has your spouse's transition affected your own life at home, work, and socially? So for me, as far as at home, one of the biggest hurdles of this transition, and this is another question down a couple on our list here, but was figuring out what the kids were going to call Samantha. From the day I found out that she was trans, I said, I'm mom, I'm mommy, I'm mother, I'm mama, I'm every variation of mom that exists. That's me. And you can find something else. And that was kind of my stance in the beginning. And I took a really hard line with it. So adjusting to what the kids ended up deciding to call her was definitely hard for me. And then also trying to find the balance at home of now that I know that she's a woman, she's always been a woman. I didn't know yet. But now that I know that she's a woman, should I be expecting her to do more stereotypical mom duties or female duties around the house, cleaning, dishes, things like that? Does transition just make that happen? And so trying to figure that balance out at home was definitely, I think, a challenge. As far as work, I'm pretty fortunate in my work in that I teach music lessons, but I'm basically an independent contractor. And so a handful of people at my work know, but most people there I'm not especially close with. I just kind of show up, teach, and leave. And so it really hasn't impacted my work environment at all. Socially, it definitely has. We've had some really great people come into our lives, and we have some amazing friends that we've met through this community that we never would have crossed paths with before. And I'm so grateful for that, including the two co-hosts tonight. And then I touched on earlier too, not to repeat myself, but just the social aspects of how I'm perceived now and what people think about me, my sexuality, my marriage, my kids, things like that, definitely had an impact. I think as time has gone on, all of that's gotten easier for me, and it doesn't affect me as much as it did most of the time. Just every now and then something will come up that'll kind of flare it back up again. But for the most part, it's pretty much just become like what Rachel said, it's our new normal. So speaking of Rachel, what are your thoughts on this one?
I'm not sure specifically, because work was kind of, it just was. I changed. I was a preschool teacher for a while. I changed classrooms, and I walked in the door having Joanna as my wife. And then when I got a new job at a nonprofit, I just walked in the door with Joanna as my wife, and there wasn't an issue. At home, we just kind of navigated it. And then socially, I think that's probably been the biggest change, because I started playing hockey shortly before she came out to me, and we have an amazing hockey community here, and Joanna has been able to play hockey with me and with the women in our league, and we've kind of all grown really close together because of that. So, I mean, yeah, things have changed, but it hasn't been like a real struggle. It's just stuff that have naturally just kind of happened as time has gone on.
All right, Jenny, what do you think about this one? How much has it affected your life?
Well, this has been a pretty big one for us. At home, not much really changed. Sarah was morphing into Sarah for a long time before the transgender word got used in our house. So the boys were already kind of used to what was going on. She'd been kind of flying under the radar around the house and kind of living as herself around home for a while. I'd say the work and social piece is really where things got really complicated for us because we are both teachers. We teach the boys, me and Sarah, we all of our schools feed into each other. So it's one giant community that we basically had to come out to. And we share a lot of the same families. We're actually, some of us share a campus. And so that was complicated, and we had to talk to everybody at one time, basically. So Sarah talked to her principal, I talked to my principal, I went to the boys' school and talked to their principal. And because we're so rooted in the community, it was relatively seamless, far more than any of us really expected it to be. And she was able to start just that following year as Mrs. Barrett, and it was like no big deal. So it was complicated only because of our jobs and what we do and where we work. And we live in that community too. So we go to the grocery store with our students. We see them at Target. We see them everywhere. So it had to be just like a giant coming out party is really what it had to be because of just the nature of what we do. Socially, a lot of our friends are also coworkers. And so it was just one big coming out, I guess. And we too have met a ton of really amazing people since this process, and new people and people that we've known for a long time and just really got to know better, or new people that have come into our lives. And it's been such a positive experience, but because of what we do and where we live, it was all or nothing.
Yeah, there's definitely no hiding when you're a teacher.
No, none, ever.
Okay, so the next question I know that we're all pretty excited to share our thoughts on, and that is, how did your children handle your spouse's transition? And how did you decide what your kids would call your spouse? So I touched on this a little bit. This was definitely a little bit of a battleground in our house in those early months because I really wanted to hold on to that title of mom and all of its many variations. And Samantha came up with and settled on an alternative name that she felt like was going to be okay, but I could tell she wasn't really okay with it. And one of the only things that's gotten us as far as we've gotten in this process is complete, open, transparent, brutal honesty, good, bad, ugly. We just lay it all out there all the time. And I just kind of called her out on it. And I said, okay, what's going on? You're not happy with this name. What's happening? And she made a good point that she felt like if she used an alternative name that people might perceive her not as the kid's full parent and instead as either a step parent or some kind of, I think she used the word interloper, but somebody who's not a part of the family unit, basically. And then I really kind of had to take a step back and think to myself, okay, so what is the definition of mom? I mean, the reality is the definition of mother essentially is just a female parent, and she is their parent for sure and is female. And so it made sense then, okay, maybe I need to be a little more open-minded about somehow sharing this title. And so we did some research online and looked at how other lesbian couples handle this. And we decided I could stay mommy because that's mostly what the kids were already calling me anyway, and that she could be mama. And so we went to our oldest son, who was 6 at the time, and we asked his input and said, we think that you're going to call her mama, and how do you want to spell it? So we gave him a couple spelling options and he got to pick. So he went with the M-A-M-A, traditional mama spelling. And that was how we settled on what the kids would call her. Now, as far as how the kids handled it, so like I've said before, we have 4 kids. All 4 of our kids are on the autism spectrum. And so at the time they were 6, 4, 2, and brand newborn baby. So the 2 little ones they'll never remember her any other way, which for me is kind of bittersweet. I think that it's a good thing overall because they get to know her as her true self. And it's probably going to be less confusing for them. But for me personally, it's always a little bit hard just because when I look at her, I see all the years of history and all the background and all that. And not that they won't know that story, because they certainly will. It's just, like I said, it's just bittersweet to know that they won't ever remember her any other way except for from pictures. Our oldest son is very bright, very verbal. And so we wrote him what's called a social story, which takes important concepts and breaks them down into simple to understand sentences for kids on the spectrum, or really kids with any kind of a special need. And we just explained what was happening in 6-year-old terms, and that Mama was going to go by she, her pronouns. And if he ever had questions, he could ask us. And in this story, we specifically said, Mama's still going to tickle you, chase you, and build Legos with you. And about 3 days after we read the story with him, he was in bed just crying. And what's going on? And he says, Mama hasn't chased me yet. And because he's so black and white and so literal, he thought, well, you said that Mama was going to tickle me and she hasn't tickled me, so something must be wrong. And so, of course, we got him out of bed and chased him around for 15 minutes and tickled him, and he laughed and he fell asleep peacefully. His understanding of the transition seems to be pretty easy. For the most part, kids don't carry the social and emotional garbage that grown-ups do. And so we explained to him, Mama was born with a boy's body, but she's always been a girl on the inside. And so now she's a girl on the outside too. And it was okay. It wasn't really a big deal. For our next oldest son, he was 4 at the time. He is nonverbal. And so we wrote him a social story as well. His was more picture-based. And it's difficult to know exactly how he processed her transition and how much he understood, how much he didn't understand. He doesn't communicate a lot of things outside of wants and needs at this point, although he is very smart and we're extremely proud of him. He doesn't talk much about feelings or emotions. So we don't really, and when I say talk, he uses a communication device to communicate with the world. So we don't really know exactly how it impacted him. I do hope that as he gets older, he's able to tell us. But again, I mean, he was only 4. And so I don't know about you, but most of my memories are from after age 4. So he may not really remember very much of it either. But for the most part, our kids took it in stride. They handled it well. I will say that we did also use a couple of kids' books. There's one called Introducing Teddy, and it just talks about a teddy bear who has a bow tie, and then he really wants to wear it on his head as a bow, and then she wears it as a bow by the end, and she's happy. And so it's just kind of a young kid way of explaining it. Another one is I Am Jazz by Jennings, and she talks about her experience as a child and transitioning as a child, again, in kids' terms. And then our third one was something about a red crayon. I can't remember the exact title. Maybe Samantha can text it to me. But it's basically this crayon has the wrong color label on it, and it keeps trying to color the color that says on the label, but that's not the color of the crayon, and it's getting upset because the teachers are getting upset. And finally it figures out, oh, I'm really supposed to be coloring a different color. And then it makes the label match the crayon, and then it's a happy crayon. So we used those books to help us as well because our kids were pretty young. So I feel like overall our kids handled it. I mean, honestly, our oldest son was getting the right name and pronouns probably within about 2 weeks, and he never gets it wrong. And if somebody else gets it wrong, he will jump all over them and defend his mama and say, no, it's she, or it's mama, or whatever it might be, and correct them right away. So let's see. Okay, the name of the book is Red, A Crayon's Story. So see, I was on the right track. Okay, so Rachel, how about you? How'd your kiddos do with transition?
Oh, they did pretty well. Our oldest was 6 at the time, and our youngest was 3. And we had also gotten I Am Jazz, and the red crayon either came before or shortly after we told them. So we had also utilized those books. And so we kept pushing the concept of a boy body, but a girl brain. And so we had talked about that many times. And so we had planned out this activity to take them to McDonald's. And the idea was we'll have a conversation with them, but then allow them an escape so that they can go and play and not have to worry about it. And then they ended up having ice skating lessons afterwards. So I don't know whether it was good or not, but we told them, and my 6-year-old at the time said, "Oh, you're like in the book, you have, a girl brain." And we're just like, "Yeah." She's like, "Okay, can I go play?" We're like, "Yep, go ahead." And that night when I was putting her to bed, I checked in with her and she started crying because at that point she just was scared that she was going to lose her parent. She was scared that things would change, and she realized that things weren't going to change. And in fact, within a year or so after transition, she made comments about how Mama's happier now that she's a girl, which is very telling to show how much more involved Joanna is and how much happier she is when, my 6-year-old notices that. So, and then somewhere along the lines, we were driving in the car and my youngest, who was 3 at the time, said, "Yeah, Mama's going to be a girl now," or something pretty simplistic. She doesn't remember that time. She's 6 now. And we were talking about it the other night, just kind of bringing up these memories. They really don't remember much. And we landed on Mama because I hated that term, honestly. There was a period of time where my girls kept calling me Mama, and it was cringeworthy for some reason. So I was very okay with letting it go. But it started with the thought process of, okay, let's think, 10 years down the road, you're with our girls and they say, "Hey, Dad." And then this tall, beautiful woman comes walking over. Every time they use Dad as a title would out her. And at the time she said she didn't have any issues with the title, but I was concerned about it outing her like that. And so we landed on Mama. We played some games to reinforce that that's what she is called. And then it's been smooth sailing ever since, for the most part. There was an issue with a school. We went almost immediately and told she was in 1st grade, told her 2 teachers. And then we had to have a meeting with the principal, and the school social worker was in there. And they told us that Josie was not allowed to tell her friends. They said, "We just don't want to encourage her to talk about it because we can't control the bullying that's going to happen." And Josie's a rule follower, and she knew that was right. I know. It's like
Jenny and I are both sitting here with our jaws hanging open.
I can see your faces. It was crazy. And so she's like, "Wait, so what's the rule?" We're like, "Oh, you're just not allowed to tell people, I guess." Anyway, so time goes on, and she's a rule follower. So I was not about to tell her not to follow the rules and that those were stupid rules, because we kind of pushed the principal and said, "Well, what happens if she does? Who is at fault?" He's like, "No, she won't get in trouble. That's the policy that we have to tell you." And we're like, okay. So she had a couple, hard times where she'd see like family pictures. And so we took them down. And then she was talking to me one time. She's like, "Mom, can I tell my friends?" I'm like, "Yeah, you can tell your friends." Plus there was like 3 days of school left by that point. And so since she told her friends, there's never been a problem. All she wanted to do was talk about her family, talk about this big change in her family. And so she struggled when all of a sudden that was not something she was allowed to talk about. But once she was, then she was fine. And now when you ask her about it, she thinks it's the coolest thing in the world because she has a different family. There's something unique about her that she is proud of. So that's been our story with our kids.
Wow.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think Addison panned to us because we were both sitting there like horrified. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine
I
that.
saw the look
I
on
know
your
that.
girls' face, and I was like, that's it.
Yeah, I know. I know our oldest son has had it come up at school before too, but oh my gosh, no one's ever told him that he's not allowed to talk about it. Ugh,
Our
yikes.
boys were so excited.
All right.
That was the first thing they wanted to do was like go tell everybody
Yeah.
once they were allowed to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were so excited.
So Jenny, how about okay, so how about you, Jenny? How about your kiddos? How'd they handle everything?
So I was raised with a second language, so coming up with a name for Sarah was fairly easy. We went with Ima, which is Hebrew for mom, so that's what the boys call her. They transitioned to that super duper fast. Our boys were 7 and 9 when she officially came out, and so they were in second and fourth grade. So like I said, we went and talked to the school. I was personally friends with their teachers at the time, so I was able just to like Facebook message them and be like, hey, can we talk? So we were able to take care of that pretty easily, and they were nothing but supportive, and everyone thankfully has been. In our case, the conversation was interesting. I mean, they'd seen Sarah slowly morphing and changing a little bit over the years at home, and we were talking about this earlier, trying to get our whole timeline figured out. We told them in March of that year. Sarah and we didn't publicly come out until May, towards the very end of the school year. And we didn't tell their teachers until the very end of the school year either. So there was a period of time at home that they had to keep everything under wraps, and everything was like a big secret. And it actually came out with some of our friends of the day. They were like, one day apparently the boys were talking in kids club after school, and one of them said something, the younger one said something, and our older one was like, shh, that's a secret for home. And we just found out that happened. So that was kind of funny. We had a good laugh over that. They both took it really well. Of course, neither of them had any experience in that world at the time, and so we didn't do the book thing. We just had to talk with them, and Rachel, we actually used the same terminology of trying to make her body match her brain. That's what we use a lot of the times to describe that to kids when we talk to them. But kids are so resilient. The boys caught on so fast, and again, just like Laura, you were saying, they're the first to correct somebody who misgenders Sarah, or anything like that. They're the first to jump on that. Our younger one has some issues with change, and that has slowly gotten a lot better over the years as time's gone on. But at the very beginning, we were talking in the car one day, and he was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get used to this. And he was 7, so little, and he trapped in the car, so it's a good time to talk. And I was like, kiddo, there's going to be a time in your life that you're only going to know Ima as Ima. You're not going to remember Ima as daddy, because that would at some point will only have been 7 years of your life. So it was maybe 6 months ago or so. We were in the car on the way home from somewhere else, just him and I. And he looks at me and goes, Mommy, remember that conversation when you said that one day I would have a hard time remembering Ima as daddy? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, it's really, really weird to think of Ima ever not being Ima. And I was like, ding, 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 we have a winner. Like, you made it. See, we talked about this. I told you this would happen. The night of transition discussion with the boys, our older son, and this kind of caught us off guard a little bit, because our older son has always been very gender neutral, gender fluid. When we've talked to either of our boys, always we've used, when you get married and have a husband or a wife, or when you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. That's just how we've always talked to our kids. It's almost like subconsciously we've just always known that we were part of this community, even before we realized we were part of this community. And he was actually the one we found crying in bed. And we were like, what's up? Like, what's going on? And he was like, well, I'm just scared that Ima's not going to want to play Minecraft with me anymore. Or Ima's not going to want to do this, or Ima's not going to want to do that. And we were like, honey, nothing is changing about Ima other than maybe the way she looks. Otherwise, Ima is Ima. Ima will always be Ima. The things that she likes to do aren't going to change. She's still going to play Minecraft with you. So those were those reassurances that our boys needed at the time. socially, because they were a little bit older than Laura, your kids, and Rachel, yours, we had to do a lot of friend navigating. So because they're in public school, and even though the conversation with all the adults went really well, we had to explain to them how to handle different situations with friends, because let's face it, who has really met a transgender person before? I know I really hadn't before this. So, and that's the case for a lot of these kids too. Morgan, our older son's friends, they've been friends forever. I actually work with a lot of those parents, either me or Sarah. We both work with a lot of their parents, so they've known us for a long time, and that was no big deal. I mentioned earlier that Toby has kind of a transient friends group. Now he's got more of a solid friends group, our younger kiddo. And we've slowly, introduced the idea to his friends as they've come around. And all of his friends have been great, and all of their parents have been great. But we have kind of coached them in situations of, if someone says this, here's how you can respond. There was one situation with our younger son where a couple of his close friends were giggling over the fact that, as he said, my mom used to be my dad. My other mother used to be my dad. And he came home and he was really upset about it. He's very highly emotional all the time about everything. And I was like, hun, you have to realize that these kids have never met a transgender person. When you say my dad is now my other mother, they're imagining their dad in a dress. That's what they're picturing. So they don't know any better. They're picturing their dad in a dress. So he was like, oh yeah, I guess so. And once we were able to reason through with him, he had a totally different outlook on it. Kind of impressed there's been no fights with that one, because he is very passionate and stands up for everybody and everything. So I'm happy about that. But it's been pretty easy, I think, for both of them. We talk about it regularly. There was never really any hiccups in the relationships they've had with Ema this whole time. I mean, Ema's Ema. Our younger one, who's having the harder time transitioning to the name, when we went on the Hawaii trip, it was right after she had come out and right after we made the change to Ema from Daddy. And he hadn't used the word. And he was just like, I'm not saying it. I'm not going to call her Ema. Going to be Daddy forever. Very reluctant to use it. And he met a friend out by the pool in Hawaii and brought the friend over and was like, yeah, this is my mommy and this is my Ema. And he said it without even thinking twice about it. And that was that moment we were like, okay, there we go. He made that leap. He made the jump. He said it once, and he's never gone back. And Ema's been Ema the whole time. Our older son, it's been a pretty easy transition. Once we convinced him that Ema was still going to play all the video games and build the computers and do everything that Ema did before, everything was smooth sailing from there. So we've been pretty lucky in that regards, beyond a couple of those initial hiccups.
And I think it's important to remember that as parents, I know for me, and I'm sure that I don't want to speak for you two, but I'm sure you would probably agree that much like a transition in a relationship is a constantly evolving event, so is transition for your kids. And so that's how my kids took it right now, and that's how they're handling it right now. But as they get older, as they go through puberty and high school, and they have to navigate those social situations, I'm sure more things will come up, but we'll just continue to support them in the best ways that we can, just like I know both of you will for your kiddos too. So our next question is, did your partner's transition cause you to explore or question your own sexuality? And if so, how? So for me, it definitely did. When Samantha went through her transition, it caused me to really self-reflect on a lot of things. And I've often joked that I consider myself Samantha sexual, because I don't know that I really fit into any particular label. I think that if, for whatever reason, the two of us were not to be together anymore, I don't know that I would ever seek out dating women, but I'm definitely still attracted to her as she is now. I mean, she's gorgeous. Who wouldn't be, right? And so if I had to choose an official label, I would probably go with pansexual, which is being attracted to people regardless of their gender. But again, I don't know that I really fit into any specific box when it comes to that. I just know I would not call myself straight, because if I was just completely straight, then I wouldn't have wanted to stay. We agreed early on for both of us that intimacy is important. And so if we ever reached a point where either one of us felt that was incompatible, that we would have a conversation about splitting up. And again, I go back to that statement I made in the beginning that not everyone can stay, not everyone should stay. If someone married someone presenting as a man at the time and they consider themselves completely straight, they can't change that any more than their spouse can change the fact that they're trans. And so I think that it's definitely okay in those situations to evaluate your options. So for me, I definitely realized that I'm outside of the heteronormative box when it comes to sexuality through lots of self-reflection. So I guess that's my answer. Rachel, how about you?
Oh, this is something that I obsessed over because I hated labels. I was so angry that people kept asking me and wanting me to label myself when it didn't matter to me. Why did they need this label? So I poured over all of the labels, all of them. There's a lot of them. And under the umbrella of asexuality, I found a label called Omnisexual. I don't know how many people have heard of it, but basically means you're sexually attracted to people because you have an emotional connection with them. And that still speaks to me, but I still hated having to explain it. It was still hard to say, when people would ask, so, what does this mean for you? And in fact, the funniest thing is when we told my parents, it did not go as well as I had hoped it would. The first thing my dad said was he just looked me straight in the eye and he said, "And you're going to stay married?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "But that would make you a lesbian." And he said it with this very serious voice. And I almost wanted to laugh because I'm like, yeah, I mean, I know that people will perceive me that way, but that doesn't bother me. But then I wanted to know why that didn't bother me. Anyway, I just went back and forth. And honestly, if I was pressed to label myself before Joanna came out to me, I would have honestly had to say that I was at least bi-curious. And I kept going back to that thought and that realization. And so I can now label myself as bisexual, and I happily do it. I don't hold any, issue with it. I had to just recognize that labels are labels. They only put you in a small box. They don't tell you the whole story, even though I wanted so badly to find a label that fit my whole story. It doesn't exist, right? That's why there are labels. And so, yes, it has drastically changed that. And for the better, I feel like, you go through anything like this, and, when you do that self-looking, and you just usually come out a stronger, better person on the other side because it's hard work. So.
Definitely. And I had another friend say, just because I was bisexual before my spouse's transition doesn't mean the transition was easy for me. And I think that's an important point too. You fall in love with a person presenting a certain way, and when they go through transition, it's hard regardless of what your sexuality was before. So Jenny, what are your thoughts on this one?
So for us, this is kind of an interesting question because we both had a lot of coming out to do. I had been dealing with my own questioning of my sexuality leading up to all this as well. We'd been, I don't want to say a strained part of our marriage because that's not really the right word for that, I guess, but there had definitely been a few points where we were trying to figure out like what was going on with me too. Because while I guess I could have come out when I was younger, I have a very like accepting family and a lot of rainbow blood in my family. I actually came out as gay in the process as well. So it kind of led us back to how did we end up together in the first place? Because how did someone who was later in their 30s going to come out as gay end up with someone who's transgender, and that kind of ends up working? So I came out as well around the same time that Sarah did, and it was just this huge weight lifted off my shoulders as well. I had never been in a relationship with another woman before. I'd always dated men. Never was truly invested in the intimate part of that relationship and couldn't figure out why. I don't know why this process made everything kind of click in my head, but it did. And I had my own coming out to do, which was really hard. That was like crazy. And I think part of that is because I was in my 30s, married, with children. And what did that mean for our relationship? What did that mean for our future? And I have to say, when we were making some of the phone calls we had to make, because all of our family lives out of the area, number one question was, are you staying together? Number two question is, like, Rachel, I think you mentioned, so that makes you lesbians? Like, that was the big question that we got constantly. And yeah, to be honest, yes, I guess that does, because hooray, I'm gay too.
It's convenient.
And I will say through my, through my experience and the people I've met, especially in the online community, that's not an uncommon story. And I think that part of that, honestly, probably deep down is you were attracted to her in the first place because of those qualities.
Right. That feminine air about her. And it's just so weird how all those little moving pieces came together and here we are. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah. Okay, so our next question, and thank you to those of you that are still hanging on with us. I know that we've been chatting for a while, but next up is, how did you decide to stay? So I touched on this a little bit in my intro. Initially, I felt like we've been married 10 years. I know this person is my soulmate, my best friend, my favorite person. I want to try to make it work. It may not work, and I have to go into it knowing that's a possibility and being okay with that outcome, but I really want to try. And so I decided that early on. And then as far as continuing to make it work, honestly, it's slowly at first and then all at once, I guess, just one day at a time, and taking each little hurdle of transition from things as minor as trimming arm and leg hair, which sent me into a crying spiral for 3 days, all the way to gender confirmation surgery and everything wrapped up in that. It's really been a lot of staying in the moment, one day at a time, and really having to do self-reflection about, how am I feeling? What do I need right now? And how can I support myself in this process too? Because it is hard. And it's not an easy thing to just, I don't know. I guess transition is just hard, and it's hard on the person transitioning. It's hard on the people around them. I've often heard that it's not just their transition. Everyone around them has to transition as well. And it's true. And so as that process has progressed, and this is going to sound maybe a little bit crude, but at the end of the day, you just have to look at it black and white. Is my life better with this person or better alone? And it's definitely better with this person. And I think that's just a question everybody has to ask themselves when they are making the decision whether or not to stay. So, Jenny, what are your thoughts on that?
First and foremost, I mean, Sarah and I are best friends, and I married her soul. I didn't marry a body. That's how our relationship is. I can't speak for everybody, obviously. I love her, and I love her no matter what, and I love her for who she is. And there was a question for a minute, like, can I do this? And I think everyone goes through that. But at the end of the day, this is where I need to be. This is my home. This is the love of my life. I can't do this alone. I don't want to do this with anybody else but her. So it was just that simple for me. And because I think it was so gradual, I had a longer time frame to process. It wasn't as immediate and urgent all at one time. So there was just a longer processing time for me. And I was like, pros and cons, definitely stick with the pros. Like, this is where I need to be.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. How about you, Rachel?
So I mean, we've been together since we were in high school, or at least been best friends since high school. And we weren't broken. Like, I just kept thinking, there's nothing wrong with our relationship, right? We still were best friends. She's still my favorite person. She's my everything. And I didn't want to let that go. So what did that mean that I had to accept, right? And I just had to ask myself what was important. Genitals obviously didn't matter. What she wanted to look like, how she wanted to present, what her name was going to be, it didn't matter. When it really came down to it, I just needed to keep her in my life. Doesn't make everything easy. It was that decision, but then it was still a process. You know, when she shaved off her beard, that was a hard day for me. When, you know, just different things like that. I think it helped though when I started looking at ways to help her transition, buying her a dress, buying her hair products to help soften her hair, or different things like that. It didn't take away the pain, it didn't take away the struggle, but it helped me know that I was here, this is where I was staying, I was going to make this work, because this is ultimately where I wanted to be. So it was kind of that simple for me too.
All right, so we are on to our last pre-selected question, and then I think Addison's going to turn to the live chat and see if anything else has popped up. So our final pre-selected question is, what would you say to someone transitioning who is afraid of being left by their spouse? So for me, I think I would say you need to understand that this is a difficult process for a spouse, and be okay with that potential outcome, because you need to live your truth. And unfortunately, not every spouse is able to stay. And again, not every spouse should stay. And I think that it's important to go into it knowing that could be a possibility, kind of like what I said earlier that Samantha said to me. If you need to leave, I won't blame you. No one would blame you. And that's a really hard thing, I think, for someone to take on when they're trying to decide whether to disclose this to a spouse. But I think that honesty is the best policy. And I think that the sooner that you can bring your loved one in on this, the better. And the sooner you can try to get ahead of it. I know that for me, not knowing that Samantha was trans for so many years is really hard. And it's something that will, to an extent, probably always hurt a little bit. Now, I don't feel that she lied to me, because she felt like she would always be able to keep this under lock and key. Her plan was never to tell a soul and to die with this secret and just keep putting on the mask of masculinity every day and pretending. And so I don't feel that I was lied to per se, but I do think that knowing sooner might have removed this sting. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to speculate. All that being said, I think that if you're trying to decide whether to tell your spouse, I think that you should, because even if your fears of them leaving were to come true, now you have the opportunity to be your true self. And I would also say, I think that a lot of the people that we've told in this process, and I don't want to speak for Samantha, but I would think probably her included, when I found out, a lot of the reactions have actually been much more positive than we expected. And so sometimes people surprise you, and you can't know what your spouse's reaction is going to be or what they're going to think until you clue them in. So Rachel, what do you think about this one?
I think this is a really, really hard question, because it's always easier on the other side to say, yeah, go ahead and tell them. But who am I to tell somebody to uproot their life and risk everything? But I mean, I can't agree more with everything that Laura said, but I can also tell you that the few months that I lived in this closet were hell. They it was awful. And once we came out and we started living our authentic lives, people did surprise us. Not everyone was amazing, but enough people were amazing. And we have then met other people that have made it worth it. And there's just something so relieving about being able to live authentically that really it's worth it. It was worth it for us. And so you have to find out what's important to you. Before Joanna told me she felt like she was up against this rock, she said, I can commit suicide and I don't want to do that, or I can tell Rachel. And for her, it was very black and white, and she didn't feel like she had any other options. I hope people can figure it out before they feel like those are their only two options. So I don't know, if you're struggling with it, make sure you're going to therapy. That's always my go-to. And then figure out how you can be authentic and figure out what that means for you.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I didn't really get into it much because I feel like it's more Samantha's story to tell. But she also, when I figured it out, was at a point of either I take my own life or I transition. And I think that when people get to that rock bottom point, they have to do something. And so I definitely second the seeing a therapist. And I apologize if I came across as you should tell people right away. Like you said, I don't mean to tell people to blow up their lives, or I can't. It's always easier on the other side. And thank you for that reminder, Rachel. So Jenny, how about you? What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I don't want to repeat everything that got said because you ladies took everything I was planning on saying too. But something I wanted to add to that was making sure that you allow your spouse time to process. It's a lot of information, and your spouse might blow up and say things. And I think everyone just needs a chance to cool down, decompress, process what you're hearing, because this is life-changing information. So be willing to take that time as well. And after a night or two, even apart, whatever that situation might be, try that conversation again, because you just never know. And sometimes just having that time can make a big difference. Otherwise, I just agree with everything that got said before me. So good luck.
Yes, good luck, definitely. Yeah. Oh, goodness. So thank you again to everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. And I apologize we weren't able to get to all of them, but I did hear that Addison has a few questions from the live chat for us. So Addison, what do we have up first?
Yeah, so we have two questions from the chat. The first came from Facebook. By the way, tonight's the first time that we're simulcasting to both YouTube and Facebook, so check us out on Facebook. The question was, if you have any tips for a spouse with a transgender partner to help them see that their partner is still essentially the same person, and how to rebuild and reconnect all over again.
Okay, so I think for me, honestly, this has been something that is even still kind of an issue right now, despite how far through transition we are. And I touched on this earlier, just that Samantha is so different from the person that I married. And in a lot of ways, honestly, I feel like that person is basically gone. She has changed a lot. And so we've actually recently been trying to reconnect because, we have 4 young kids and they have special needs. So childcare is difficult. And so we've committed to once a week having a date night, even if it's just in home. We put our phones away, we order in food, and we watch a movie, or we play board games or something, just to try to reconnect just the two of us and really focus on our relationship. And I think that has been helping. But I also think that, and I don't want to speak for them because they're about to give their own answers, but I think that a lot of people, for the most part, do kind of stay the same. And it's really just the outside packaging that kind of changes. And if anything, they're just happier. And I mean, Samantha's certainly happier than she was pre-transition. And so that has been really nice to see. But we're sort of navigating this, we've been together for 15 years and all of a sudden we're getting to know each other all over again. So patience and honesty and communication, I think, are the key. So Jenny, what do you think about this one?
Yeah. Sarah hasn't changed too much since transitioning, but I was going to suggest you're almost dating all over again. So it's starting that relationship from scratch, and really getting to know each other once again, because it is subtly different, at least in our case, where there were some things we had to work out. But I think going back and almost starting that dating process over again could be fun too. I know there's a lot of books out there where it's like get to know each other and you just answer questions back and forth. And even if you've been married for a long time, that could be something fun to do, especially under this circumstance, because there might be changes to things and feelings that you wouldn't know about.
And we did have one other question.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
From YouTube. This one came from Maddie. She asks if, as part of the transition process, if your wives discovered new things about their own sexuality and how you navigated that.
Okay, so I guess I'll turn this one over to both of you, because Samantha always has been a lesbian and is super hardcore lesbian and has never strayed from that.
So Sarah.
Rachel. Okay. Rachel, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're questioning everything, nothing's off the table. Everything's fair game to question at this point, right? And so the statements that she made before about, never being attracted to a man, she did question that. And it's not, it's an interesting topic. It's kind of a hard one to explain, because it's not like I think it's more like she can openly admit that that a man is attractive. I think it's more of, oh, I don't have to hide this. Like, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but you're more free she feels more free to just kind of express an attraction or a feeling or a thought without feeling judged. I think that's probably the best way for me to put it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so Addison, was that our last question?
Yeah, that's it for the questions. I did want to mention real quick,
Okay.
a shout out to Julie Kraft, who made the new intro video. Thank you, Julie. You're amazing.
Yeah.
But back to you guys.
All right. Yes, I agree. It looks really nice. So I will take this opportunity to talk a little bit about next week's episode. So next week, Samantha is going to return as the host for another important episode. Please join Trans IRL and be sure to subscribe so you get those live notifications. And she will be speaking with parents of children who are transgender. So they will share their experiences in raising a transgender child and answer your questions. So we'll be returning to our regular Thursday broadcast time next week, and it should be a really great show. So I want to also thank Addison so much for all of the behind the scenes work that you do on this show. I have no idea what you do or how you do it, but you make it look fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, of course. And Jenny and Rachel, thank you both so much for taking time out of your night to join us and being open and honest and raw with your experiences. And of course, and thanks for both being great friends. And hopefully we've helped a spouse or two along the way. And we'll see you next week for another great show. Yeah. Everybody have a great night.